Thank you for joining, everyone. This is our Cults Across Culture. My name is Dr. Tabitha Chapman. This Cult Awareness Month has been focused around policy. This specific webinar is one that I've been wanting to do for a very long time because there are multiple myths that go around about cults and cultures. One of the myths that I see frequently, especially right after a documentary comes out, is people from certain cultures don't fall into the trap of cults. And we're here to show you and to explain that it is important that you remain vigilant no matter what culture you're from. So we have Nikki, we have Rachel Rain from the UK, and we have Ryan Hernandez. I'm very excited to talk about what's going on today.
Thank you for hosting this. Thank you for your heart to bring awareness. I'm hoping this year there'll be some more visibility and where more people can grab a hold of this and run with it. So thank you for all that you're doing. I came aboard, I saw it on Facebook and I said, wow, this is interesting. I do a lot of work around the month of January for Spiritual Abuse Awareness Month, but I've always wanted to know if there was a cult awareness month. And so I guess accidentally found Tabitha on Facebook and I was like, oh, I'm sold. I really want to see this actually blossom. And so, a little bit about me, I'm Nikki G. I come from a narcissistic family system. So, that's what I call my first cult, if you will. That's where I was programmed and indoctrinated and, gaslit. So, I was more attracted to and attracted by um, different types of cults. And so, as I got older, I found myself in a whole lot of toxic relationships because I had no understanding or knowledge of what I was a part of. My family of origin was very religious, and being a Black woman, being raised in a Black family, there was no choice about whether or not you go to church. It was part of the staple, and maybe I'll have time to go into the historical part of the Black church. And so as I got older, I got saved in the Christian faith at the age of 19 and just hit the ground running. I had a lot of zeal, a lot of passion. I still do, but a little older, so I move a little slower now. But I eventually found myself in five different cults over the course of my life. One of the ones of those cults has been in the news since last October, the International House of Prayer in Kansas City, Missouri. But most of the cults were religious in nature. Some had a hybrid of religious and political cults. So, as far as I was involved in a lot of cults where they were dealing with Christian nationalism and the pro life movement. And so I left my last cult, I believe, in 2016. And I didn't understand what had happened. I just knew that I have to figure this out. I might be kind of getting into some of the questions, but I eventually just said, you know what? The last cults I was in, I spiritualized the experience. I tried to find answers spiritually only. I'm going to do something different this time. Went on YouTube, found a lot of different voices dealing with cults from Stephen Hassan to Dr. Yanya to Rick Allen Ross. I mean, just a lot of different information. I just started to consume it and understanding psychologically what I've been through was kind of the kicker to awaken me to seeing the pattern that I had been following unaware. So got to start going towards my own healing. And I was a single mom at the time. So my focus was me getting better and my daughter getting better because she was a part of many of the cults I was a part of too. As a matter of fact, the second cult or the first cult, if you want to consider it officially, the cult leader is my daughter's grandmother. So you can imagine what that story looks like. But then I started to heal. She started to heal, got some therapy, did some work on myself. And eventually in 2020 is when I decided to say yes to doing this work. I found the social app called Clubhouse in 2020 during the pandemic, jumped on there, listened to other people share their stories. I started to share my story. And then I said, wait a minute, I think I should be doing this. Let me get some training and became a certified trauma recovery coach. And so now I serve clients one on one, I lead support groups. I am a co host on a podcast called Surviving the Black Church. My heart is for any human being who's been through religious trauma, spiritual abuse, and or cults. Over the past couple of years, I really wanted to see some of these resources be implemented in the Black community. So that is kind of where my focus is now. We also have the Black Religious Trauma Recovery Network, where we are looking to house both client and clinician to consult as far as how to service those in the Black community who've been through these type of experiences.
There's so much there I could relate to, also growing up in a very religious environment with very strict, and at least one of my parents being narcissistic. So there was a lot there I could relate to. All right, who is next?
Hello, my name is Rachel Rain. I am from London in the UK, South London. I decided to be part of this project when I was asked by Nikki because I'm very much always ready to utilize any platform I'm given. My situation's like this. I didn't come from a religious background. I was 13 years old when I first joined the cult, and the cult that I was a member of for 7 years is called the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God, and it's actually founded and run by the wealthiest bishop in the world, who's a billionaire. He is like the how I don't even know who to compare it to. Someone did a video recently where they said that basically he's wealthier than Kim Kardashian. But anywho, this particular cult, they're all over the world. They're all over here in the UK, over 40 branches. So, when I got involved in all of that, I went through lots of craziness. I got married at the age of 19. I went through psychological abuse, forced exorcisms when I was under 18 years old, psychological abuse, narcissistic abuse, financial abuse, coercion. There's just so much I went through in that time. And it was the whole of my teenage years, literally zapped, from the ages of 13 to 21, was lost to this place. So during lockdown, I separated from my husband, who I married in the cult. And then suddenly I found myself in a position to finally talk about my experiences, because prior, even though my husband at the time left the church, he was still very much terrified of it and wouldn't talk. So when we separated, suddenly it was like, wow, Rachel, you can talk about this. So I got a friend who also attended the cult, and I just said, hey, let's go live on Instagram. Let's just talk about all of this. Because over the years, you meet people who were in the cult and they left, and you kind of compare notes and talk about experiences. But I wanted to do something more. I just wanted to voice, to vent, to put it out there, to give the ultimate FU to the place. Because talking out about cults was the worst thing you could do. So when we did that on Instagram Live, the floodgates opened and people from up and down the UK started to get in contact about their experiences. It was a matter of time before we got international survivors getting in contact, sharing their experiences. There was a lot of media attention. We got published in a number of top newspapers here in the UK. And recently we had a BBC documentary, BBC Panorama, that aired in December. So in terms of what I've been doing here in the UK, I've just been trying really to just bring the issue to the forefront and really just champion raising awareness about spiritual and ritual abuse. I created Surviving Universal UK, which is a actual company now that's registered, and we're going to be developing safeguarding training. So my kind of speciality is safeguarding and around legislation, because in the UK we do have coercive control laws, but I am actually part of the team that's fighting for an amendment to that legislation to include cult leaders and religious leaders. I'm an activist, I'm a mom, I'm a law student, and I'm just really here to speak about my experiences, because you wouldn't think cults are a thing in the UK, in London. You wouldn't think it. You'll just think we're just here drinking tea. But there's crazy things going on over here in the Black community. That's predominantly where these cults operate. They go to Black neighborhoods, Black and brown neighborhoods.
I'm really appreciative of you coming also from the religious background with the bishop, the story of the bishops and everything. All right, Ryan, I'm looking forward to your story.
Hi, so I'm Ryan Anthony Hernandez. I'm born and raised in Los Angeles. My parents are from El Salvador, and I always had, with my family, we were normal. I mean, we're Catholic, still are, still am, but there are some groups within Catholicism who take religion too far, where it's extreme. They give themselves the pass to do all these things like manipulate, coerce, bring on this guilt, shame. And so when I heard about this webinar through Nikki G, I was like, yep, sign me up, because I feel that there are so many people out there who don't have the tools or the language to either get out of a cult or to move forward after leaving a cult. So I joined a community at the age of 17. And like I always had that strong desire to just do good things, like soup kitchens or simple things that were helpful. And this group promised that I would get an education. I would be doing some charitable works around the world. This community was mostly Filipino and I was Hispanic. And I felt that now that I look back, I felt that they were after my parents' money. But as I was in, I just felt that I was an outsider, and we'll probably get into that later on. But during this process, I wanted to leave, but at the same time, they would tell me things like, well, God wants you here. Like, who are you to deny God? And so, one thing that I really am hoping to, get out there is the language for consent, because I thought that I was consenting and they would say, you agreed to this. But the truth is that there is coercion. There are there's a lot of manipulation, and I didn't see that. I saw it all as I consented, but that's not true consent. So one of my goals is to get out true consent is, and sometimes people mistake just agreeing as consent when that's not actually consent, it's coercive. So that's a bit of my story.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to getting to learn more about that, especially with the mismatch of culture and how you did feel like an outsider, because I'm betting that some of that is kind of what saved you or what took you away from that. I don't mean to spoil things. I was a former member of the cult called Nexium, which was very similar. It was definitely something like I felt inspired to join. I felt like I had a lot of issues, and it definitely made sense to me that if I was able to resolve my issues, that would be one less person with issues in the world. And then I could help other people resolve their issues, and that would be one less person. So slowly over time, we'd reach this critical mass of wonderful ethical people. And at the time, that made a whole lot of sense to me. But then, as we got involved more and more, it became less and less looking like a let's make the world a better place program, and more looking like we're going to identify issue after issue after issue and tell you that we have a plan for that. I have a plan for that phrase, but anyway, they have a plan for that, and all it costs is $6,000 to $10,000. You can't afford $6,000 to $10,000. Well, you're obviously not invested in your life enough. And then we would get into like work exchanges, and it got very complicated. So that brings me here, why I'm even doing any of this kind of concept. And then the fact that we're here to talk about policy is going to be interesting, and also culture. So my first question that I really want to get into, everyone, is to ask you all, how do you feel your own culture, ethnicity, culture, religion, anything that's kind of like culture oriented? How do you feel that's played a part in the cult recruitment and or even in the leaving?
I think culture played a pivotal role because I think most cults, they're really good at exploiting real issues. They're really good at being opportunists, that's the word. So where I'm from, in South London, for example, and in every branch of that particular cult, it's always in a really deprived area. They use the culture of that area in order to lure people in, because they know that if they go to Black and brown areas, they're going to find devout Christians, people with some kind of spiritual belief system. Hence, to exploit. They know that if you're desperate enough and if you're vulnerable, you may just do something. If you sprinkle some Bible verse on it, you may do something that you would otherwise not do. So I think the culture of the area demographics played a big part in it. Cults are very strategic in where they set up shop. And the fact that, in my situation, they targeted ethnic areas and my area was an ethnic area, that definitely played a big part.
Anyone else want to add to this question?
Yeah, I totally agree with what she was saying about how cults are very strategic, especially like in the locations where they are targeting. Growing up in LA, there are a lot of immigrants, people come from other countries, and our parents, they work hard to build, whether it's a business or to survive in this country and to learn the language. So I really learned a lot of that grit, determination, try to get a good education and plan for the future. And then this group comes around, and I guess because I was well off, my parents were well off, they've worked hard. I feel like there was so much love bombing. And then when I joined, afterwards, I'm hearing that they're asking my parents behind my back, hey, we need money for this, for that. But I never got that money. I never got any of that. It's almost like a kidnapping, it kind of feels. So my parents have this heart. Okay, yeah, there's this Christian heart or whatever where they want to help. And then this group comes in, sees that my family, myself, we are determined to grow. And something that I felt, though, however, when I was inside, because the cult that I was in was mostly Filipino, I would say 99.9% Filipino. Once I came in, then they started doing things like telling me, okay, you have to detach from your Hispanic culture. You have to keep yourself away from your family. Learn our language. Don't speak Spanish. So little by little, I started opening my eyes to the cultish ways, but I was still young. So what I'm trying to say is cults are very strategic in whom they recruit, but also there are very strategic in the steps that they use to break a person down or to separate them from their family and ultimately from my culture.
Thank you for sharing. And then we have a hand raised, so we'll take that after.
Sure. So I'm going to speak from the perspective of the Black community here in the States. There probably is a lot of similarities between the States and the UK, but here in the States, historically, and I'm not just going to say the Black church, because there are cults that Black people are involved in that are not predominantly Black, but there is a notion, even generationally, that we have such an affinity tied to, let's say, Christianity. And so, because after slavery and during Jim Crow, there was our different forms of spirituality were stripped from us, and we were forced to take on Christianity. And so that became something that became a way and a source of just getting through those hardship times. And then the Black church was created. And out of the Black church, you have politicians, orators, writers, poets, musicians, and the Black church became almost like a womb where just different forms of our giftings and callings would come out of the Black church. So you track that to present times, there is this notion, and it's in our DNA, that we are supposed to be attached to either Christianity, some sort of religion, or some form of spirituality. So with that, you're in, what does that look like practical wise? In the family, you're hearing grandma and great grandma and pop pop saying you better go to church. Even as a young adult, there is a push that you need to be in church. Because they equate being in church being in God. So that pressure would cause many of us to be a part of communities, whether it was toxic, high demand, or cultic. We would be a part of a lot of these communities, and we would remain in these communities even if we started to realize something was wrong because of the cultural dynamics. In America, the statistics in the Pew Research Center had done a study recently, and the statistics are 8 out of 10 Black Americans identify as Christian. So there is this heavy push to be religious. And when you break down comparison to other religious groups in America, we make the majority. We're the most religious, and then we're the most active in religious communities. And so because of that, coupled with the lack of education, coupled with the lack of resources about cults, oftentimes we're born in cults, we remain in cults, and it's hard for us to exit cults. When you try to talk to your peers, your family, there is this notion of that's not abusive, that's not cultic, that's the enemy trying to pull you out of the safety of God in this particular group. And so you hear this day in, day out growing up in the Black community. And so many people have been forced to remain in these abusive communities because of that. So when they leave, it's not just dealing with the actual cult experience, it's also being ostracized and somewhat demonized by your own family and your own friends. Even to this day, There are many people that I grew up with that I know they don't even know that I am doing the work that I'm doing now. I'm not hiding it. If they find out, they find out. But if they did, there would be such disdain towards me. How could you do that? You were raised in church. I saw what you did in the Baptist church when you were 10 years old and how God was on your life. So there's this expectation that that is where you will remain, even in the midst of coercive control and abuse, that you're just supposed to take it. There's another notion that if you are outside of church, you are outside of God. If you are outside of a cult, well, they don't consider it a cult. A lot of the language that's used in the Black community now is church hurt, and that's it. Religious trauma is not really used, and definitely not cults. It's church hurt. So when people in the Black community hear the terminology church hurt, it is a signal that, yes, I've been hurt. Maybe my feelings have been hurt. Maybe something happened in the experience in the church, but that's okay. Just keep pressing on. You don't need to leave. Just shake it off. Shake the dust off your feet, is what they say, and you remain. And there are a lot of people who are labeling cult characteristics and cult markers in their communities as just church hurt. So a lot of generational pressure to attend these type of communities, remain in these type of communities, and never exit these type of communities. So
Thank you. I appreciate that. To kind of summarize that, we have groups that are targeting specific areas, geographical areas with different ethnicities living in those areas. We have groups that are targeting cultures for their financial abilities or wealth. And we have people targeting groups based on their longstanding religious scaffolding that's already built into their structures. One thing I wanted to point out is that we have a history of cults that specifically target different cultures. One thing that we aren't really aware of until we bring it to light is that most of us have heard of Jonestown, right? The People's Temple. That was primarily African American victims. It was about 900 people died that day in Guyana. And I think it was like 5 or almost 600 of those were African American, most of them women, and most of them were forced to participate in the death of their own children first. So it was a huge tragedy. And they're not the only group that targets various specific ethnicities. One of them, for instance, was the Japanese cult that was most famous for putting the sarin gas, I think it was, in Tokyo subways. They targeted people in Japan, specifically Buddhist and Hindu, very well educated people that were being indoctrinated in order to participate in the violent attacks. That wasn't the only attack that they had done. We have the Rajneesh movement, which is a very well respected movement even in this day and age. And unfortunately, a group of them have behaved in a very destructive way throughout history. So they have, they created, I mean, you might even say they're sort of the leading edge of the new age sort of philosophical meditating mass movement, if you will, right? And so a lot of people still, like, I was using the Calm app, I believe it was, on VR, and it features the Rajneesh way of meditating and Osho and all that, without having a single care in the world that this has harmed many people, so it was very interesting. And there's many other different groups like La Luz del Mundo, the light of the world. They are targeting Latinos and Latino Americans, specifically of Christian culture. We did have someone raise their hand, and they have a really important point to point out that what they've seen and experienced regarding culture.
Can you hear me now?
Can hear you.
The group that I was a young teenager in a long time ago was maybe most similar to when you were describing Rajneesh. It was a Hindu-based kind of new age thing that was big in the 70s. And they have really rebranded. Now I would say that to an outsider, it might look more like NextFem did in the Western world. However, what's interesting culturally with them is they have seemed to actually tailor their presentation, because it's worldwide, to each culture, where we actively worshipped our guru in many extreme ways back in the 70s. Now they hide that from English-speaking countries, yet in India, they're doing all the same things. And there's photos currently of children praying at altars to the guru. It's different in the Spanish-speaking world. It's different in the United States. And that's just what I have to add to culture and cults, is that at least the cult that I was in seems to have a strategy of presenting itself differently to be received in the culture where they're trying to recruit.
That's an interesting perspective. They did a whole research recently, I think it was within the last 10 or 15 years, on the concept of using the phrase cults with a group of people in a community versus using the phrase new religious movement. So as it turns out that if there is a group of people that are creating some sort of community center that's moving into your community, if you describe them as a new religious movement, the community is more likely to be like, oh, yay, cool, we like religious movements. But if you describe them as a cult, the community is like, no way, get them out of here. And that is a study that was done on basically the vernacular of using these terms, even though the term cult is probably like heuristic, like a whole, I don't know, it means a lot. The term cult means a lot. It's a very loaded word, right? New religious movement means less to people. It means it's less scary. However, not all cults are based in religion. And so notice that I describe this as a community center that's being built in their community, not necessarily a church. So it does change people's representation because we have concepts of freedom of religion. And there's a general misconception out there in the United States that at least, I don't know about other countries, you can let me know, but that at least if the freedom of religion concept means that religions can get away with anything and they can do whatever we want, and we just sort of have to like be okay with it, which is not true. So as I like to say, religions still can't hurt people. They still can't violate a person's basic human rights. And so kind of a message I'm trying to get out there is to counter this idea that, well, what can we do? It's freedom of religion. Well, they still can't hurt people, you know. So okay, well, thank you for sharing. We'll move on to our next topic, which is basically, what do you think would have protected you from being able to, from joining? What would have protected people who joined and had children from allowing their children to be part of this group? When you think about what exists now, or what existed then, if only they had listened, what do you think could have protected you a little bit more from experiencing that level of coercion and being as part of this group?
Well, for me, I wanted to go back to what you just said about how they prefer the word new religious movement. Because when I was in this group, we had Catholic authorities who were calling this movement a cult. And while that was happening, and people were putting it out there, be careful with this group, it's a cult. The group would just say, these are liars, or they would twist things around, and they would say, we're just a new religious movement, we're not a cult, we're friendly, we're loving. And my parents didn't want me to join, but they told my parents, look, we're just a friendly group, we're going to give him an education, he's going to go to Italy, go to Rome, get his master's, things like that. It's like, all right, they're paying for it, fine. What I wish I would have known was, or what I wish I could have done, was listen to my parents, first of all, who they had a bit more sense in them, listen to the warning signs, not just from outsiders, but from my own experience. Because once the love bombing stopped, it was all persecution, it was all paranoia. We're being tracked down by the Illuminati. But I also wish I knew boundaries. I knew what gaslighting meant. I didn't know any of those things. And when I left, I think that for the Hispanic culture, especially the older ones, they didn't use that terminology like gaslighting or coercive control. And for me, as I left, it was difficult to express myself. It was difficult for my parents to understand because they had no part of it. My family, relatives, they didn't know what happened. It was so closed off. I was gone for 11 years. So I think that if I could, I would just listen to my parents. And if I could, I would also take more time to understand how cults work so I could have avoided it.
And I would say, in my experience in Nexium, there were lots and lots of news articles about that. There was lots of lawsuits filed that the DA's office tended to overlook for whatever reasons. So I think, racketeering out there, I don't think it's taken as seriously and or used as often because it is a big bang. But I think if there were more people willing to at least investigate that level of organizational crime going on out there, and racketeering can affect anything that's an organization. It doesn't have to be an organized organization with a 501c anything or a C Corp or B Corp. An organization just be a group of people in this case. So I think being more serious about investigating potential for racketeering or other related kind of laws out there could potentially help people, because it's really easy, in my opinion, to get a group of people who are already sort of on your side, if you will, to believe that all the journalists are lying. And it's really easy because, we're doing such a good thing. And when people do good things and the world doesn't like it, the bad people of the world doesn't like it. That makes sense. Bad people don't like this good thing that we're doing. But people have that internal voice. We do have that internal flag, and the cult kind of teaches us to turn it down or turn it off. So I guess, like, along the lines of listening to your parents, I would say, like heeding to that internal flag and even seeing signs of them trying to turn the flag down. I would have liked to see that as a sign, as wait, hold on, that internal voice is important. You can't turn my internal voice off. But yeah, so that's from my perspective, being more proactive about racketeering from the DA's office. Why can't the government over investigate in the cases of these types of groups or movements? It might be annoying, but if I'm part of a group like a CAM or something like that, I would want to make sure that no one's getting hurt from it. So I would want to make sure that there's that sort of oversight somewhere along the way to be like, yep, I would have more of a willingness to fix anything that might be causing damage if I wasn't intentionally trying to cause damage. At least that's my perspective from actually having movements and things like that.
For myself, I think what would have helped me as a vulnerable young person is at a systemic level, because I attended public school, and back then there was absolutely no awareness around coercive control or even radicalization. Now, the UK's moved a long way and there is mandatory training on radicalization and all of those things. But even with the radicalization training, I think that could have helped me, but the way that the training's set up, they're only made to look at certain religions when it comes to radicalization. They're only looking at, Islam when it comes to radicalization, when in reality, I was being radicalized. But I was a Christian, and because I was a Christian, it was completely overlooked. I mean, I literally changed overnight and became incredibly isolated, withdrawn, detached, obsessed with the church. In break time, rather than having lunch, I had to fast because we had to fast as part of the church, sometimes for 12 hours a day during exam seasons, which I think in America, you guys call it the finals. So at that time, I was senior within the church. I was an assistant, which is just under the youth pastor. So I had to perform exorcisms and had to do counseling and mentoring and all of these crazy things. I was in school. I was so young and so vulnerable, and there was an obvious safeguarding concern. But back then, there really was no awareness. And I think even now, that's what my company, Survive and Universal UK, is going to help to do. We're going to help to inform safeguarding professionals and educators on this, because so many young people are being radicalized or brainwashed or coercively controlled within places of worship. And that's something I think could have saved me. It could have been an intervention. If there was some teacher that had an understanding of coercive control and radicalization, perhaps there could have been some intervention and I could have, be helped. Because at that point, I had no idea about cults and coercive control, and I had a choice and that I shouldn't be controlled. I had no idea about any of that. So I think at a systemic level, for sure, I think if there was intervention, if there was safeguarding policies in place, directly addressing this form of abuse, because I was being abused, and there was physical manifestations of that, I think it would have definitely have helped me. And I would like to think that now things are better, and that if there was a young person like myself who just suddenly became super conservative, withdrawn, detached, that safeguarding professionals would pick up on it and there would be a safeguarding referral. But at the same time, I know, and as you said, when it comes to religion, people are really scared of stepping on religious toes. So even so, I don't know how seriously they would take it, because they wouldn't want to be accused of discriminatory towards someone's belief system. And it's funny, Nikki, we were talking yesterday and we were saying how, people don't want to step on religious toes, but they really don't want to step on Black religious toes, because that's a double whammy. When really, sometimes we're the ones that really do need the rescuing, So to push away from all of the kind of stigma and no, but I don't want to be cancelled. Abuse is abuse, So I think intervention would have really helped me. It would have gave me the help and the kind of rescue that I damn needed. I was being abused in a cult. I was a minor. I was under 18. I was in public school. There was ample opportunity for intervention, but there was just no education around it. So that's what I'm hoping to change.
Yeah, that's really important. And I think you made such a wonderful point about people not wanting to step toes, not wanting to step on Black toes, and ultimately understanding that we must protect people from abuse,
Yes.
even non-minors. I mean, there's an element of people in domestic violence relationships, of people, well, they chose to be in the relationship. So, I'll just be over here until they're done. But it's not a matter of being done. It's a matter of not being fully aware of the circumstances in the situation,
That's right.
because it's being hidden from you, not because you're like ditzy or anything like that, which is another
Well,
myth
that's a good
people that
point.
people have.
That's a really good point. It's not just kids. I mean, it's everyone, because we all, any age can fall victim to this. But I think it could be extended to healthcare professionals receiving this training, because when you get a doctor that has a patient that's refusing to take their medication because they're being told that their pastor, would punish them, or that they're using their faith, that's spiritual abuse. So I think it's really important for healthcare professionals also to have training around spiritual and ritual abuse, to help those vulnerable people who are being cursed in a medical capacity. So many people stop taking their medication, they deny themselves medical treatment because of brainwashing.
Yes, very much so. And just to tag on that, and I know, Nikki, I'd love to hear from you as well. The way I think Adaya, I'm not sure if I'm saying her name correctly, but I think she had made a point about that there are groups like drug centers that target people, but they're sort of a Christian organization. And this isn't to say that all Christian organizations are cults, but it is to say that some people are very preying on people. And I don't mean that in the good way. They prey on people who are very vulnerable in a state of trying to recover from drugs and alcohol, which brings me back around to this idea that, Nikki, would you like to share what your thoughts are on this?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Rachel, for that. And I kind of agree with both of them, and more obviously education, especially as it applies to the Black community. There are so many myths around cults within the Black community. And one of them is that cults only target white people, or cults are a white problem and not ours. A lot of times those in the minority arenas are not represented. And so it continues to perpetuate the myth that, well, that's not our problem. It doesn't happen in our communities. So we have all these myths and these stigmas, and then the lack of awareness, the lack of education, the lack of resources. It is hard to find any type of safe measures and protections, especially now. Ryan talked about he wished that he would have listened to his parents. Some people's families, some parents, they're actually perpetuating the abuse to actually cause you to go into some of these cults. So we're talking about mostly religious cults right now, but there are family cults. And there's a normalization, unfortunately, within the Black community that love and abuse should coexist. So as long as you're being loved, meaning there's food on the table, you have clothes, you go into school, that's enough. But you might be emotionally being manipulated, psychologically, coercive control right within the family unit. And if it's religious on top of that, that's a double whammy, like it was for me. And so, as you come into adulthood, if you've not worked through some of these things and these traumas, you wind up being attracted to people and groups and situations where it's the same thing, it's just a copy and paste. Before we can affect society, we have to affect our home, where there's teaching about what a predator looks like versus a safe person, because there was so much programming and indoctrination in my family unit, and I watched by example my parents connect with people that intuitively, as an empathic person when I was young, I knew something was not right, but they could not see it. They had no boundaries. So I watched this happen over time. So that taught me not to have boundaries. Even though my red flags were going off, I was taught to suppress them, that my perspective of reality was not real, but the authority figure who I was connected to, their version of reality was real and it was true, even if it was distorted. If they said the sky was brown, but I know intuitively the sky is blue, I would eventually start to believe the sky was brown. And so within the family unit, a lot of abuse was normalized. And so if we want it in the schools, if we want it in society, if we want it in public policy, it kind of starts in the home front, at least I think. But like I said, in the Black community, there are not a lot of resources, if at all. And if there's a notion collectively, oh, that cults, that happened in Jonestown, that happened in Guyana. That was an old thing. There's no modern Black cults. I have a list of at least 7 modern Black cults that are alive and well and thriving right now in society. It's even merged into the entertainment arena, into the hip hop arena. We see cultic markers there, into some of the movies. And so that is my heartbeat, to actually bring a lot of this cult awareness and education into the Black community and start to dispel some of these myths. If we want to see people preventively avoid some of these groups, or if they've actually been a part of these groups, get the resources and recovery and healing, we're going to have to start really dealing with a lot of the myths. So, but I like the idea of the education in the schools that Rachel mentioned, especially on a preventative measure. What would that look like if it was in the high school? So if the family didn't do it, then the schools are doing it. The local government is not doing, maybe the federal government can do it. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm going to put in some resources if you find throughout this session that you've needed some help and support, at least in the United States. And Rachel, if you have any resources you can share for the UK as well, that would be great. I'm going to put in RAIN 988 and the domestic violence hotline for you guys if you do need some support. Also, the Freedom Train Project and any of these other organizations are here to help and support you. So please do not feel alone, especially if you are maybe for the first time experiencing kind of a Me Too moment of understanding that maybe you were experiencing this sort of exploitation as well. I want to hear from Lisa, because Lisa has her hand raised. So Lisa, go ahead and share your thoughts.
I really appreciate what Nikki just had to say about abuse in the home. After leaving the Move of God at 19, the cult I grew up in, years later, I found out that many of the families who joined, or the adults who joined and brought their children in, had come from highly abusive homes. And the kind of abuse in the cult was similar to the kind of abuse they experienced. And they didn't recognize that pattern, that although they didn't like the abuse, it was familiar enough that they tolerated it and stayed.
Thank you. And actually, this is part of the reason why I've included all of this need for help, because the next thing I say could be maybe for some of you who are either listening now or may listen in the future, I do want to get the important message across that having a very intimate, close sexual relationship with family members is not socially acceptable, is not okay. Parents who are involved in this type of behavior tend to convince their children that this is the way they show love and it's okay in their family. In the United States and other countries, it is not an okay way to show love to family members. And if you need help, please do reach out to any of these numbers. This information that I'm sharing is not meant to hurt anyone, but it is meant to let you know that there is help available and to know that we don't normalize this type of behavior. I'm glad that this subject came up. I did not intend to share this message, but it is an important message to get out there because there are a lot of people who grew up in this, family cult format and are not aware that what occurred to them is not normal, and or they feel so much shame about it that they often even forget that it occurred for that. So please do reach out, and if you need help, there are links all being shared right now, all in the chat. Click on those, save those. And so the last thing that we can talk about here are if there are any concepts of what you would like to see change in terms of policy or laws or any gaps that are out there. I'm working to change some gaps, which are domestic violence agencies not accepting cult victims freely. I'm working to educate domestic violence agencies on how they can create a bed night for them and what we can do to provide services and resources for them. I'm interested to hear what you all think, especially Rachel in the UK with your experience with being in law school and things like that.
Yeah, so with me, there's two really interesting things. So the first one, of course, is the coercive control amendment that we're looking to implement. So as you know, the UK, like France and like some other places in Europe, we outlawed coercive control. But what a lot of people wouldn't know unless they kind of been through or was involved in it is that the coercive control laws only apply in domestic settings. So that means, for example, if your mom or your boyfriend was to coercively control you, then there's legal provisions. But if a religious leader or a guru, your bishop, your friend was to coercively control you, there's absolutely no legal provisions because the legislation kind of governing the coercive control legislation only specifies in a domestic relationship. And when we look at the definition of domestic relationship, it is pretty much tailored to the romantic relationships or immediate family relationship. So that's a major loophole because that basically means that unless they're your boyfriend or your immediate family member, they can get away with coercive control. And that's something that we really are working to try and change because with cults, I think they all have coercive control in common. It is the common denominator across cults. It's the one thing that I think we can all pretty much bet on to be that silver bullet that can maybe get someone prosecuted, because for a lot of us, the burden of proof is on us as survivors, but it's so hard to prove. It's so hard to get something through the line and into court. Whereas if we had that one little amendment that just, kind of specified that it's not just in domestic relationships, that could be it, because that could be us showing a text message we had or, experiences of witnesses seeing other people being coercively controlled. So that's something we're working really closely with a few of us who are kind of leading the movement here in the UK. And I think it's inevitable that this legislation is changed. I think it's become pretty impossible for them to defend why they're only kind of limiting it to a domestic setting. But I think once we get that implemented, I think that we can finally start to see some of these kind of gurus and cult leaders prosecuted, which is a major thing for us. It's so difficult for a case involving cultic abuse to be brought to the Crown Prosecution Service. These days, it's getting better. They're kind of going through other avenues, but we need something that's going to work. And the other thing is around conversion therapy, because gay conversion therapy is something that happens so much in cults. In the UK, there's been lots of talk around conversion therapy being banned, but unfortunately, it keeps on falling to the back burner. And even if they do put forward the legislation that's kind of already set to be in place, there's loopholes. There's always loopholes when it comes to these kind of things. But basically, the loophole is that they are not looking to make legal provisions for conversion therapy taking place in places of worship, because they don't want to step on religious toes. Statistically, most cases of conversion therapy take place within places of worship. So basically, they're not tackling the major kind of like offenders. They're not targeting the people that's really being targeted here. They get to kind of bounce out of that loophole. So that's something a lot of the LGBTQ plus charities here in the UK are advocating for. There's lots of different movements going on, and I hope that that could be put in place, because again, there's so many cult survivors who I think kind of get lost in this movement when it talks to cults, because I can only imagine how incredibly doubly challenging it must be to have to go through the process of being conditioned and brainwashed and coerced, as well as suppressing your sexuality and your identity. So I think that will set a big precedent, and it will help a lot of people, to get justice, to kind of protect themselves, and just hold perpetrators to account. So that's what we've been getting into when it comes to policy in the UK.
Thank you.
When it comes to legislation, it's actually been something very difficult for me. And I'm still in my own journey, processing things and working my way. Because while some of the things happen in the United States, it was in different states and different cities, different locations, and in different countries. But while I'm not there for legislation and laws and all that, especially on an international level, what I am working on is a podcast, and the podcast, it's called The Truth That Heals. It's not entirely about cults. I don't want to just stay in the cult world for the rest of my life, but I do have a soft spot for cults as a survivor, as an ex-member. And I believe for myself that it's important to give a platform for other survivors or people who've gone out, or family members of members, to have a place where they can say their truth. Because in order to get to do legislation, there have to be people who are able to share their stories. You can't share your story because you're ridiculed, you're called a liar, they say that you're fabricating the whole thing. And then even other survivors will try to shut you up. So when I started off by writing blogs about the atrocities that were happening inside of the cult, because I didn't know any other way. I didn't have any other spokesperson. I didn't know any laws that could help me. But as I started doing that, other survivors, ex-members, should I say, instead of coming to my defense, were trying to shut me down because they still have this respect and admiration for the founder, for the cult leader. So what I'm trying to do is build a place little by little where survivors can find that safe place where they can share their stories and they can connect. And hopefully from there, they'll find either the tools or the resources. Like today, there's so many tools and resources where people can look it up and they can see what they can do next.
Thank you, Nikki.
Hey, I'm in the throes of putting all the resources in the chat. I love the work that Rachel is doing. I don't know if getting involved in a legislative part of things is my lane. It may very well be. I loved political science when I was in college. If we can deal with the things in the cult arena on the macro level, it's even more of a safeguard and protection for cult survivors. But my heartbeat over the past year has been really towards the family cults and the children. I've been in the throes of reading this book by a lady named Janet Heimlich called Breaking Their Will, shedding light on religious child maltreatment. She's done a lot of work dealing with bringing awareness to religious abuse within the family. I would love to see legislation protecting children because they really are vulnerable. They have no choice or agency. They are at the mercy of their guardians and caregivers and parents as far as where they would go. And not just religiously, spiritually. I mean, I know of someone right now, they have a cultic type of a dynamic with themselves and how they raise their children I can see the cult dynamics, and I just wish there were laws to protect children that way. But like you mentioned earlier, Tabitha, I mean, you have the CPS. Sometimes they do their job, sometimes they don't. And that's not even in the cult arena. Can you imagine if this became part of the caseload? I mean, I'm happy because something needs to be done, but that's a whole nother story for another day. But yeah, like Ryan, my what I've been doing, the work I've been doing is working with the one-on-ones, working with the support groups. I run online free support group. It's in the meetup. All those links are in there for Black survivors of religious trauma and cult dynamics. We're starting back up in September and we're offering something new now, group coaching. So, we really want to get into the solution as far as recovery for themselves. It's very easy as a cult survivor 10 years later, 11 years later, to stay stuck in those experiences. But what does that look like to turn the page and move forward? Some may get involved with advocacy work, some may be activists, some may just be great human beings, and that's all they want to do after those experiences. So we want to bring awareness not just of cults, but what does it look like to live post cult? So I've been enjoying staying in that space, connecting with, I call it metaphorically going into the infirmary where people have been spiritually and religiously wounded, where they have been discarded by society and deemed to never thrive again. I like to sit right where they are. And I guess that's why I'm a coach, maybe in another form of a mental health professional. And I love to just encourage them and let them know that there is life post cult. But I don't know, connecting with Lisa and connecting with Tabitha, I might be pulled into the legislative side of it. I don't know. I love the two of you and what the work you're doing.
A little letter writing never hurts. We're at the end, but I would love to see it's Adia. I saw the pronunciation. So if Adia, if you would like to ask your question, I would love to hear from you.
I just wanted to, when we're talking about legislation, I really want to kind of lean into the principles of harm reduction. I don't know how many of you all are familiar with it, but I was working my internship was at Above and Beyond in Chicago, which is one of the few harm reduction based drug and alcohol treatment centers in the world. I think that model can be adapted because what it does is it just allows people to be wherever they are and look for support. A lot of times when you have people trying to emerge from a cult, they're dealing not only with people shaming them for being in a cult, but also shaming them for leaving a cult. And harm reduction kind of gets into the middle of that and just says any positive change. Have a cup of coffee outside your cult. Maybe read a newspaper article, anything like that. So when we were talking about policy, I just wanted to bring that up.
Yes, last week we had Dr. Christine Marie, who works in the FLDS community, and that's her method of working in that community. She's not there going, "Woohoo, you guys are all in a terrible, terrible cult," none at all. She spends one-on-one time with people there. She's never judgmental. She's never like, you got to get out. She takes them to coffee. She brings them to her house, braids their hair, whatever it can to create community structures and friendship outside of their own group. So follow her. She's phenomenal for other stuff. Dr. Christine Marie Katas is her last name. I don't know that I'm saying that right, but Katas, but it might be easier to find her that way.
Thank you for everyone's participation in the chat, or you just held space and shared resources. If we want to see on a human level, people avoid cults, exit cults, healed from cults, we're going to have to start to connect with the different cultural cult experiences that are on the planet. I am grateful for what has been started in the post-cult movement to help people come into awareness and education and legislation, but this is so important. What it looks like in the Philippine community may not be what it looks like in the Black community or the Korean community. So we need more voices to come forward when they're ready, and more resources. It doesn't matter what ethnic group, what race you are a part of. We want your stories and your experiences to be heard in your community resource. So thank you for even thinking of this particular type of webinar, Tabitha. It is so needed. And thank you for the guests that came on. I appreciate your participation immensely, and hopefully people can avail themselves of your resources and the hard work that you are doing in this space. So that's my final comment.
Yes. And
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. You guys are amazing.
Thank you. All right. Do get your ICAM t-shirts. This is from last year, but you can still buy it. So yeah. But yeah, I really appreciate it. I work hard for these weird little these things. So my hope is that in 2 to 3 years from now, I will not be the one running ICAM, and it will be a decentralized process like Domestic Violence Awareness Month, because it is a lot of hard work, but I am enjoying doing it.